start because I have some thoughts. So you were asking if I have been getting any feedback on the podcast.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows me or who's hung around me for any length of time knows that I thrive with analogies. I'm an analogy guy, metaphors. So I would say, I don't know if you remember when you were younger and if you ever did any weightlifting when you were younger. I remember when I was early 20s, I realized, wow, I can lift a few weights and all of a sudden I feel a few muscles. And that's what being in your early 20s is like. And so we started lifting weights, and one of the things you see is when you first start, you see this immediate response. Your muscles grow, but then it tapers, right? But if you keep doing it, if you stick with it consistently, it's all about consistency, and it's all about the long term. Yeah. And we'll talk about this. Today we're going to talk about starting a business, starting a church, building a business, building a church, and what that looks like. What are the priorities, the way you do it, and that, and maybe even some complementary type factors in the two.
Yeah.
But with the podcast in particular, you were saying, are you getting any feedback? And I think, well, it started off and people are like, wow, you're doing a podcast, and you see all these, the views immediately. And more and more, there's been this consistency. We do it every week now. And what I want to do is just make sure that we're always doing it, you know? And I know it may never be just like the guy that lifts weights. You see the guy, you see him every week at ACAC or whatever, and you're like, man, this guy's been lifting weights for years, and look at him, he's still puny. But but the truth is he's in better shape than a lot of guys. Yeah. So anyway, all that said, we're gonna keep doing this. You notice our wives aren't here. Anybody who's was expecting that our wives were going to be here to talk about children, rearing children. That's an old word, rearing. You don't hear it much anymore. We don't have them here this week, but we will soon. So today we're going to talk about starting a business, starting a church. And I probably want to start it off the same way we did when we talked about we talked about marriage, and we said, what are our credentials, if you will. Yep. And so I would say if I'm having a discussion with somebody about starting a church or building a church, and then you tell me what you bring to the table as far as credentials, sometimes humility is good, and the truth is, I don't think that I brought a wealth of talent to starting a business. I did have some grit and determination and some energy and I kept pushing on a rock, right? And then God's grace and God's favor. So I'll start it that way and say, when someone said, hey, you've started a church before? You've started a church? You've built a church?
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about credentials and those sort of things, you got formal credentials, but you also have a lot of informal credentials, and I think most people have that. Most people have, whatever field they're in, you have some semblance of formality in terms of credentials. What qualifies me to do this? And then you have, kind of informal experience or, credibility based upon what you've done and those sort of things. So, I look back, I didn't really notice this at the time, but looking back at this season of life, kind of up until this point, I see where the Lord's used me to help start things in the church, launch things. So I've had the opportunity to launch a church in Tennessee, launch a school in Tennessee. I actually didn't want to do either one of those things. It just kind of fell upon me, in a way. And then here in Virginia, the same thing. I had no intention of starting a church, but the Lord brought it in that direction. And none of those things are singular things. It came up in my mind to do this. I'm going to venture to do this, which probably is a bit of a difference, I think, between the business world and the church world. Maybe not completely, but
we'll talk about those too, the differences and similarities, but yeah, for sure.
So, the fact that you've done it before and you have experience in it, that gives you some credibility. There's, as I said, there's formal credibility in terms of, formal education and other things that you bring to, someone does bring to the table.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've had the opportunity for that. But I will say, I think formal education has been important in my personal formation to get to this point.
Sure.
I can't point to specific educational experience that has said, oh, this prepared you for that.
Yep.
But I think it's more of a global preparation, and in some ways, sometimes it's just learning to pick it up and put it down and move in a direction towards a goal.
Yeah.
Which is some of what education does for you. You're working towards a goal. So I think there's a lot of ways that the Lord brings experience into our life. So.
Yeah, and I would say I'll do the same thing. So and one of the things I would ask you as well, and I will say for me, the entrepreneurial kind of spirit, and I wonder if that is a common theme in church planters, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, the starters, because a lot of times it takes, in business anyway, different people to start it, especially big businesses. Businesses that take off, the starters are usually not the ones that continue on to grow it and to grow it past a certain point.
That's very similar when you study church planting.
Yeah, that's interesting because that entrepreneurial because entrepreneurs a lot of times get bored. And my employees would tell you that I get bored. I want to always do something fresh or new. And if I'm not, then I tend to get a little bit stagnant. So for me, I started a business 13, I guess I'm in my 14th year, 15th year. I don't know. It was 2011, so we're in our 14th year. So from nothing, but that came from, and I'll ask you the same thing, is my dad always had, he worked in many different jobs through the years, but he always had this kind of curiosity and this energy to do something. He wanted to always start a business, and he had a few small businesses here and there, but nothing really ever took off.
Yeah.
But it was, for him, it was always this itch that he didn't quite scratch.
Yeah.
And then the interesting thing is, so my brother, my next oldest brother has started 2 businesses. And my next oldest, the older brother after that, has also started 2 businesses. So it's interesting that seems to be in the blood. I don't think it's in the blood as much as in the upbringing. So is there any similarities there with you, with your family?
Yeah. So I don't.
And do you think they correlate to church planting?
I do, to an extent. I think growing up in business, my dad did work for another company when he was a very young man, but from the time that I was born, I don't ever remember my dad working for someone else. He always worked for himself. So whether that was initially farming, then working on the water, to starting his own construction company, I don't ever remember him actually working for someone else under someone else's business. He did, again, when he was younger, and then even my mom, when I was getting ready to go off to college, my mom and my aunt started a business together.
Oh, really?
And worked that business for several years. And so growing up in it, seeing the struggles of it, the work ethic, I think, was really important. I think there probably is, at least for me, a correlation. I'm not saying that's like consistent for everybody, but for me. Do you think
risk aversion is one of those things? I mean, like, I've had people tell me through the years, as first of all, when I first got into business, I came out of a corporate setting, a company that had been sold, and most every other person went into a similar corporate setting in another company.
Interesting.
Except me. And then I go off and do this crazy thing, start a pawn shop. And everyone's like, wow, that's a real diversion from where you came out of. And I think, to me, baked into that, having a father who was kind of entrepreneurial, is that the risk, the lack of risk aversion, the fact that I didn't really see imminent failure, right? Where some people would. They would say, "Oh, wow, if I tried to start a business, I mean, I could fail.
Yeah.
I could really fail and take my family into bankruptcy, you know?" And I had people tell me, that I could never do that, what you did. And I think, oh, well, I didn't really desire to do a whole lot else.
Reminds me of the proverb we studied this morning. Oh, there's a lion outside. I'm not going to go.
The sluggard says there's a lion outside, and I could die, so I'll just stay in here.
It's the same thing.
It is, and I don't want to disparage people who work for a company their whole life, but but there is something different, and so that's what I was getting to with your upbringing. And my mom also it's funny because my mom owned her own, but she's been in the cleaning business, house cleaning, and she'd made a really good living doing that as well. And so I think there's just that that willingness to take risk that's kind of also baked into my childhood and probably yours as well.
Yeah, I think risk aversion is really challenging for people in their own personal growth. The fear of breaking free of, whatever it is. If I were to leave this consistent job or this consistent income, what might happen? I could lose this or lose that. Right now, it's consistent. So I think there is a bit of risk aversion at times. And sometimes it's just built in people's personality. I think God uses different people to do different things, and I think sometimes it's just built in the personality. We know each other's stories pretty well, and I think when you were working in that corporate job, to me, like what you were doing, you're still an entrepreneur. You were having to break new ground. It was risk to that. Rejection certainly at times. People who didn't want what you are.
Rejection in sales, for sure.
And that's all together in both business and church. You're trying to start a new church. You want people to be a part of it. Sometimes you get rejected. I don't want to be part of that. Either they're rejecting, the message. They're rejecting. Sometimes you feel like they're rejecting.
Wait, you deal with rejection in church as a pastor? That's funny because one of the things I would say is when people say, I actually had someone approach me today and say, "Do you have a standard kind of speech or message that you give people that are thinking about starting a new business?" And I don't really. The one thing I would say, and I wonder if you would echo the same thing, it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
I do not say everyone should go start their own business. I do not think that. Especially if you can't, if it hasn't been instilled in you that ability to say, failure, that stinks. I failed today, this week, this month, this year. It was just terrible. That's all right. Get back up.
Yeah.
What would you say about planting a church? Should everybody start trying?
Yeah. No.
Or every pastor, everyone, even who feels themselves called to the pastorate, should all those people think about, or is it appropriate for all of those to think about planting a church?
No. Well, not to think about doing it themselves.
Yeah.
I think the church should be the local church should be about church planting. They should want to break new ground. And sometimes that's sending people out. Sometimes that's funding it. There's different ways that you can kind of break new ground moving forward. So I think just missionally, the mission that the Lord has set for the church pushes all of us into church planting. In some way, we ought to be participating in it. But not every church leader should say, "Oh, I'm going to go out and be a church planter." There's reason, and sometimes there's just, logistical reasons. You've got, little kids that maybe it's not the right timing for you.
Yeah. Well, you've had little kids for 30 years or so. I don't know, 20
some years. Yeah.
It's always been the case.
I mean, and you're going to, and that's just like, you had little kids when you were building a business.
I did.
It takes time away from kids. But you got to consider those things. I do think the younger like for me, like at this season of life, me personally, again, whatever God wants to do, God will do. But I don't personally see me launching out to start another church at this season of life again.
Right.
But I'd be happy to mentor, fund, help young guys who have much more. I was speaking with my son last night, and it comes up frequent in our conversation, is that you've got the opportunity to take risks at this season of life that I don't really have at my season of life.
Yeah.
So, pray and live what
That's a conversation. That's a conversation I had with, it was just kind of an impromptu conversation I had with a few young people. It was in Columbia. We were in Columbia. We're sitting around the breakfast table, and it was some young guys that were talking about starting businesses. And as we talked about it, I realized they had a really keen interest, and they really thought, hey, this might be for me. And that's actually another podcast I'd love to do, is talk to business owners. And I think I mentioned it to you. Talk to business owners and say, hey, what's the input you would give someone who's thinking about it? And I would agree with you that I've thought about starting other businesses, and I still kind of have that inclination. But when talking to younger people that are thinking about starting businesses, I think that really compels me maybe a little bit even more, to say, hey, I could be involved or integral in somebody else's business startup.
Yeah.
What are the key things? As I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about when I started up. When I opened, I always tell people I opened my doors that first day. I rented a location, put as much stuff in as I could. And the funny thing is, well, this is how we know each other, know about each other's story so much, is because we've known each other so long, almost 25 years, is that your father-in-law was instrumental in me opening a pawn shop, because that never had it crossed my mind. I'd never even had set foot in a pawn. I say that to people all the time. I never set foot in a pawn shop prior to opening one.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I didn't know that.
No, I'd never set foot in a pawn shop. Around here, it would just be a little bit. I mean, the words that I would have associated with would have been sketchy, dirty, dingy. You don't want to be seen there. And so that was always my impression. And so when your father, an older Christian man who had retired, your father-in-law, Nicole's father, said to me, well, I think I asked him, because I was unemployed at the time. We were visiting you guys, and I said, hey, Dwayne, what's the story with a pawn shop? Because I'd heard that about him, that he had a pawn shop. And what I learned was he had had a good career and was just bored with it, I think. And said to Sharon one time, hey, that pawn shop that I like going into is for sale. I think what do you think about us considering buying it? And the rest was history. And so he said that to me, and because he said, Toby, you'd be really good at it. And I thought, pawn? What in the world? And so one of the things I would ask you, as far as church planting or starting something new like that, what were the things that you said, okay, do I have these, maybe even personal character qualities that would enable me to kind of forge out into this, or the things that I need to know that are in place before I jump? If someone's listening and they're like, oh, I'm thinking about starting a business, or I'm thinking about starting a church, what would you say to them are some things that are prerequisites on the church side?
Yeah. I would say I don't think I was very introspective. If I were to count starting a church, starting a school, starting a church, I don't think I was very introspective either one of those times.
Hindsight's 20/20, right?
Yeah, it came about more in terms of necessity in a way. Sometimes not necessarily the necessity for me personally, but the necessity of what needed to be done. And you just kind of feel like, oh, I can help there. I think I can do that. And because particularly the first time around, I I didn't know. Like I didn't know what I was doing. You're just kind of learning as you're going. You're picking up skill. You're asking people for help. And so I don't think I was very introspective in terms of saying, okay, do you have what it takes to do this? It was almost like an assumption that I've got to do this. This is happening. God's calling me to this. The door's opening. I'm walking through. God's going to help me because I don't really know. And I think particularly with the church, we started 4 years ago, and I say that very from my heart. It was a group of people. It wasn't me. It was a group of people that helped to launch the church. It was really out of love, out of necessity in some ways.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people that were desiring community and had common interest and common goals. And
so it just kind of came together, and you just step into that. And, I think about your journey with the pawn shop. In some ways that was an opportunity that was presented to you at an opportune time, or I probably should say an opportunity that you grabbed a hold of at an opportune time. I would assume that's how you saw it.
Yeah. And for me too, the things that I would say were prerequisites. Do you enjoy work?
Yeah.
Right? Do you enjoy working? Because people who, I think there's a lot to be said about that. People who don't enjoy working, I always say, do something different. Well, I can't. Then I'm sorry, I can't help you. Do something different, Or maybe it's not your work you enjoy. I mean, maybe it's not your work that you don't enjoy. Maybe it's that you don't enjoy working.
Yeah.
And that's a different problem. And maybe it's because you don't enjoy working. And okay, so I'll tell you the things that for me stood out to when I talked to Dwayne about starting a pawn shop. Maybe you don't enjoy working because you don't see good fruit. Sure. You're not seeing a product that's actually helping people, or it's producing some kind of good fruit. And for me, and this is the perception I did not have of a pawn shop. Dwayne said, "Yeah, you actually can. First of all, you can make a good living, right? It can be lucrative, but you can really help people." And I thought, oh, okay. So the myth I always heard was you took advantage of people, right? And you can really help people in people that have nowhere else to turn can turn to you for when they need. When they need assistance, and you can do it in a way, and this is the thing that really stood out to me, is you can do it in a way that shows compassion and concern for people. Because that's the thing I didn't think was in most businesses, and a lot of businesses, I can do it in a way that actually shows concern for people.
And I don't think a lot of people perceive it this way, but I think it is the way we ought to perceive it. It allows people to keep dignity. Here's something I have.
Right.
That I'm exchanging for something I need right now.
Yep.
And to meet a need that I have.
The funny thing is, people used to feel the same way they used to feel about debt the way now people at least in a couple decades ago feel about pawn. They would say, oh, it's kind of, there's something shady about it. Well, we don't feel that way about debt anymore. And the truth is, people that are pawning are not going into debt.
Right.
They're using collateral. Yeah. The way it used to be to get some funds that they need, and then they go pick up their collateral later. And so we don't have that same judgment about debt now. Debt is like, yeah, sure, everybody.
Yeah. Well, I think, we should be, as a church, as a people, and, in business, personally, we should be a generous people, willing to give, willing to help, living with an open hand. I really believe that. Mm-hmm. But there is something about helping people keep dignity, and I see that even in how the church helps people. There's times when it's a need to just give. Hey, we're going to help you. We're going to give this to you. There are times when we say we have this need at church, and we're willing to pay you to meet the need. We want to bless you or offer it specifically to you because we know you have a need. It allows the person to maintain a sense of dignity that I'm helping to participate. This isn't just a handout to me. And again, I know maybe some people don't necessarily like that perspective, but the Bible affirms work. It affirms this idea of us being regularly engaged, and frankly, particularly for young men, I would say, and maybe it's the same for young ladies, but I know for young men, it's not good for me at 48 to be idle. It's not good for my boys to be
don't think
idle.
I'll ever be idle.
Yeah, and to just
be.
kind of sit around and think, well, what am I going to do? Like, work is actually healthy. It keeps your mind focused on productive things versus unproductive things.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would say, I think considering it's not bad for someone to want a 9-to-5 job. That's not a negative. There's some people who are built for that, and they'll work hard. They're 9 to 5,
Yep.
but they don't want to think about it after 5 o'clock.
Right.
And you can't do that starting a business, starting a church. At least that's my. You're thinking about it.
Right.
I can't take off. Even going away, like I can take off from some of the responsibilities, but I can't take off from my mind.
It's that bucks, and that's one of the things that people don't. When I talk to people about the responsibility of starting a business, starting a church is the same way. The buck stops here. That whole concept of the buck stops here. It's like someone asks a question to one of my employees, and if they don't know the answer to it, guess what? It's coming my way.
Yeah.
Or if it's a challenge that they can't face or they don't have a solution to, guess what? It's coming to me. It's just kind of the same way in a church. The one I was going to say, the one we talked about prerequisites earlier. The one thing that I saw when I came back from that trip to Tennessee, and I thought, this is a business idea that I might think about, is I said, and we're going to talk about the differences and maybe similarities in this approach. I said, well, wonder what the competitive landscape looks like, right? So for me, I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia. I said, okay, are there pawn shops in Charlottesville? There were 2. And I thought, well, are they providing a service to the people that serves the people well? Right? Because if they are, then that's a little different. That's a little different scenario for me. If they're providing a really great service to people that serves them well, then I would only be trying to capture new business that they're not serving right now. And what I found was one of them I thought was doing okay. The other one I didn't think that was doing that great at serving their customers well. And so I thought, great, this is a good landscape for me because I know that there's already people that understand the value of what I bring that are not being served well, right? In my estimation. Any similarity? I'll take it that there first because I know it's different. I don't want to conflate, and that business and church are the same thing. We're all just trying to attract a customer, but there are definitely some overlaps. I think the one thing, so for me, it was being relevant. I wanted to be relevant and provide value for people. You can take that anywhere you want to, but do you see any similarities or real stark differences there? When I approach and I say, what does the competitive landscape look like? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. I think it's similar in some ways because, so when I was in Tennessee, I was in a community that was, you would think is churched out, church on every corner, just about, everybody went to church. So even there, the idea of starting a church was kind of like, why would we do this? There's tons of churches.
It's like having starting McDonald's when you got one every corner, or Starbucks around here. Like, how many Starbucks do you really need?
And so I talked to another pastor who was a pastor of a decent-sized church, and normally my expectation would have been that he would have said, "Why are you doing that?" Whatever. Mm-hmm. And his comment to me still resonates with me. He said, "There's still unsaved people here," and he said, "Let's pray." And he said, "I think this is a good idea." And so that's what I feel the same way about any community. As long as there's people who are not hearing the gospel for some reason, there's an opportunity for people to build a community around or in an area where people need to hear. That being said, I do think looking at what other churches are doing and are they fulfilling the mandate of the gospel to make disciples, going into all the world, preaching the gospel.
Right.
Is that genuinely happening, or has it kind of become more of a country club or a community center or other things where the gospel is just kind of, something that we kind of slather on top, but it's really not the foundation of what we're doing?
Yeah.
So I do think you ought to look at that. I think someone who's thinking of planting churches ought to look, is the gospel being stewarded well in this community? Is there opportunity for us to help steward it well?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, so yeah, well, there's some similarities then for sure. I would, and it's funny, I was having a conversation with someone recently and they said, well, Tobey, that's a business way to look at it. This is a church, so there's a spiritual way to look at it. And I agree. I agree that you can't, there's not a perfect parallel between what grows a business and what grows a church, or even how a business should think about growing and how a church should think about growth. You were going to say something.
Well, I think what you were saying earlier about the buck stops with you, in your business. And that's, I sense that some as a pastor. I would say starting it, sustaining it. You have some guys who are probably out there who are very, very much in that entrepreneurial, I'm the sole pastor, I'm moving it forward, we're pressing it through. You're either with me or, they're kind of charging the course. And I think sometimes in business that works really well. Somebody who sees the goal, I'm individually pushing forward to move it forward. And so, again, you'd have to speak to this because you've seen a little bit of both sides of this. But from my perspective, I think one of the areas where the church is a bit different is you're trying to bring. You're not like. I feel like I've built enough credibility with our leaders that I could, if I went into our leadership meeting and I said, God's really speaking to me, we've got to do this, we've got to move forward in this area. I think right now I would have, if we put it in financial terms, I'd have some capital with the leaders, right, that the leaders would say, okay, we trust you, we'll move with you. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to work to bring people along with you in order to get to where you want to go. And sometimes there are leaders who kind of maybe have a steamroller personality. We're just, we're not going to care what, a church, because you're a nonprofit, you're working generally with a board and other things. So you got to bring other people with you into the direction where you're going, which it seems, when you're kind of the sole owner of a business, you've got the opportunity really to direct it exactly how you want it to go, generally, without having to worry about other leaders giving input and insight and trying to manage that.
It's funny you said sole owner, so this is just an aside, but I think it's definitely part of the conversation. People say to me, are you 100% owner? And I say, no, I'm 50%, right? And literally on the books. And someone said to me one time, and the other 50%, by the way, just in case there's confusion, the other 50% is my wife. And someone said, why don't you do 51-49? And I thought, and I said, why would I do 51-49? Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. That means, I have a little bit of leverage. Yeah. And so, that sole ownership. And obviously I do think that every success we've had, it's been God's favor. So it's, while I own it, I only own it till the day I die, and then it goes somewhere else, and owning is kind of a strange word anyway. The one thing I wanted to maybe address how this is the sales guy in me thinking about how I attract or compel customers to come in my store. For me, it's been, and I will say back to the original thought about it being not just taking customers away from places they weren't served well, because I think that is something that actually, I think that corresponds to the church. I think there's plenty of churches that are not serving their people that God has entrusted them with well. And so a lot of them should find alternatives. Yeah. But for the most part, it's those people that don't even understand the value you bring. And in church world, it's the unsaved, right? In my world, it's someone that doesn't have any idea how pawn could even be of value to them, like how my shop even benefits them. And so for me, it's presenting a value proposition and being relevant to someone. So I advertise. Churches don't really advertise much. They do some, but I advertise, and for me, from day one, it's trying to capture. And this has been the most enjoyable part of my business, has been capturing the new audience, the audience that never would have. And just like I said, I never set foot in a pawn shop prior to doing some market research. I love capturing those people. It's evangelistic in its nature. I mean, it really is kind of, but that's been a real focus in my advertising and my focus over the years. And that's been really enjoyable. And the problem and the challenge with that is saying, how am I relevant to the person who's never walked into my door or never set foot in my shop? They obviously have lived without me. And they've realized they've not said, wow, I really need a good pawn shop around here. What does the church do about? I mean, how do you think the church approaches that? And are there parallels there? Being relevant to the person who's not in church, or even maybe being relevant to the person who's in a church that's not serving them well.
Yeah, What I have observed, one, is I think churches are notoriously bad at marketing, and even when they do market, sometimes it's kind of like, I don't know, I don't necessarily want to be negative, but it is kind of kooky, cheesy, and that's a product of a lot of things, maybe not as much resources, and you're kind of, like, I know for myself, a lot of times it's just trying to figure out how to do it myself.
Right.
To save money, to save whatever. So a lot of times the advertising component, the reaching out to people, can sort of be subpar compared to, a business or other things. But then I think sometimes it's simply because maybe leaders in the church are not capitalizing on the resources in the church. You're not using the right people for the right things, and you have pastors who try to do it all. And again, I'm not criticizing anybody, because I've fallen into this trap as well, is not wanting to ask anybody for help. I'll just do it because I don't want to ask anybody.
Delegating.
Yeah. And that's hard. It's hard for a lot of guys, because you think they're busy, they've got a lot going on, and whatever. The other thing is, for a church, you're not really, you can perceive it as selling a product, but it's not really selling a product.
That's where I get into trouble with church people when I have a conversation about attracting new people.
Yeah.
You're not selling something, Toby. Okay. All right. You're right.
But you are trying to convince them of a need of something, in the same way that I think a sales guy would try to convince, hey, you need this, this is important to you. But it's something that people genuinely feel like, oh, I either don't need that, or the way I'm doing it is fine by myself.
Can I tell you what I think the key to that is?
Yeah.
And I think this does translate to the church setting, and is also a business practice or a sales tactic as well. All right. So in sales training, we learned about making a latent need an active need. Okay. Latent need was something that I don't recognize as a deficiency in my life. I don't recognize that I need it. I don't recognize that it's something that is lacking. And when I'm exposed to that reality, that, wow, I have a need that I didn't even know about, right? Then that becomes an active need, because now I'm looking at it saying, oh, I do. And that's a sales tactic that in business makes people say, oh, and even if it's sometimes a little conniving, like, oh, you need that new iPhone. You don't need the new iPhone. You definitely don't need the new iPhone. You need a flip phone is what you need, not a new iPhone. But so it can get a little slimy, but I think in the church, that is the sales. That's basically saying, hey, there's this latent need. You don't know what it is, but I'm going to tell you what it is. Is you have this need, this, and not even the hole in your heart. No, you're a sinner, right? That's a great way I should advertise that way. And in business. Yeah, you're a sinner and you really need me in your life. No, but that taking that latent need, and once you're exposed to it, I mean, I think this is what evangelism is once you say, oh, you're right. There's a need in my life, and now I understand what it is, what it looks like, and then it becomes an active need. And so I think that maybe there's one parallel that.
Well, I think capitalizing on opportunities where people come face to face with what they feel is a latent need. So what we say in the church is that, well, that's your need for salvation. Your need to, one, avoid the wrath of God that is to come. Right. Two, dwell with Him eternally. That's what we want to give to people. And there's a few times in ministry where people come face to face with that, and I think that is where wise leaders in the church capitalize on those times. And so that's at funerals. You can't deny it. Everybody's going to face death. You got a coffin sitting in front of you or a jar with ashes sitting in front of you. Everybody in that family, no matter what their relationship with God is at the moment, is going to come face to face with the reality that whoever that person was is gone, and either that's all there was, there's nothing more, or there's something more. And I would say, based on my experience, and I've done a lot of funerals. I've had funeral homes call me because there's nobody to do a funeral. I didn't know the person, and they were unbeliever or nominal believer, but family still comes. And to be able to offer people in all sorts of situations, you need what I'm sharing with you. Yeah. People are very open at that point because and you made a really good point there. They have felt like is a latent need, right, has now come to the forefront, and what I need to do is help close the sale. Yeah, close it. Yeah, ABC, always be closing. Yeah, sales. Yeah, whatever. But that's one of those things that I say, when it comes to the Bible and what the Bible teaches us is that. And I totally lost my train of thought there. Always be closing. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. That's exactly it. And so the truth that you need an answer to the question that we all have to answer. All of us have to answer that question. And it's appropriate for us at a funeral to be presenting the question that every single person has to one day answer, because the question is, what happens when that's me? Yeah. What happens when that's me at the front in a box? All right. What happens then? Yeah. And that's every single person. And the truth is, it's a latent, because we push it down. We don't want to. A lot of people don't want to think about it or talk about it or even until maybe one time. And the truth is, some people are fortunate enough to have to deal with it when it actually stares them in the face versus it suddenly staring them in the well. Yeah. Well, and again, I wonder if this is similar. So, for instance, in sharing the gospel, if we go out and cold turkey evangelize, you may hit 10 people. One may give you the time of day to be able to talk with them. Generally, what I've found is that one who's given you the time of day, sometimes it's because they want to debate, or just kind of fight a little bit. But if someone's genuinely willing to listen, and they haven't been someone who has been receptive to the gospel to that point, it's generally because something's going on in their life. Maybe they've lost their job. Maybe a family member's passed away. Maybe they're going through a health challenge. Something that sort of opens them up to a willingness to be able to share. Let me help you with something. Let me share something with you that's going to benefit you, going to benefit your relationship, help bring peace to you. And I wonder if there is a correlation, and I don't know the statistics, but if you're cold turkey calling somebody in the business world for sales, is there something that is already kind of preparing someone to accept what you're offering versus those who kind of click, I don't want that, hang up the phone right away? Well, and to me, it's with marketing and with just having doors open during set hours. It's the same thing. When I'm advertising in someone's living room when they're, eating their breakfast in the morning, getting ready to go to work, and they see my ad on TV or they hear it in the radio or whatever,
I may not be relevant to them that day. That day, I may not be relevant. The day they walk into my shop, I still may not be relevant. They may have been driving by and said, oh, well, I've never stopped in. Let's go see what they've got. And they walk in and they say, oh, okay, you do guitars and you got gold and you got, guns and things like that. But what it is bringing them, helping them understand what I do offer for the day that they truly realize that they need it.
Yeah.
Or decide, oh, okay, he's got something that I just now realized that I need.
Yeah.
Case in point, COVID hit, and then the riots hit, and it was that summer that was just a little crazy. I could not tell you how many people walked into my shop, because I deal a lot in firearms, walked into my shop, and you could see them coming from their car. They were uncomfortable. They didn't know what the process was going to be or what they were doing, but they walk in, they say, and like, how can we help you today? That's one of the things we do. By the way, I'd encourage every church.
Yeah.
A smile is free. It's free. It's free to smile at people. Smile and say, hey, how is your day going? How can I help you today? You can even say that at church. How can we help you today? But we would say that, and people would say, I think I need a gun, because it was this tumultuous period of time. It really was. And people came to me and they realized that all those advertisements they'd seen for the last several years, or the times they've driven by and they knew, oh yeah, he does this, this, and this. They finally said, oh, I need what he has to offer, and I'm going to walk inside. I think that's one of the things that maybe churches could learn from too. I think is that we don't always have the answer to the questions people are asking. Maybe they're not asking the question. That's what I mean. When someone walks into our church for the first time, maybe they're not asking the question yet. They're just curious.
Yeah.
They just need to be exposed to it, and they're just curious. And we can't be hitting them over the head and saying, you need this, and they're not even asking that question yet. Yeah. Does that make, I don't know if you...
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You could tell me I'm wrong.
I think what you're getting at is important. And one of the things that I think about as you're telling that story is your tagline is changing pawn for good.
Right.
So, when I think about just hearing you over the years, and what you've tried to do is you've tried to create a welcoming environment. Again, you can elaborate on that more so than I could, so that when someone comes in the door, it makes them feel more comfortable. And I think that is something the church can learn from, because we're very community-oriented in the church, but sometimes we're only community-oriented with ourselves. And when someone new comes in, we may not be as intentional. Everybody's got their groups that they're sitting in, or their spots that they're sitting in, and that smile or other things. It's not that people, I don't think people are generally being rude. They're just not thinking about my responsibility to make other people feel welcome. I think even in terms of the aesthetics of the building, does someone walk in and is it junky? Is it, not well taken care of and other things? Does it create kind of this atmosphere of, I don't really want to be
like
here.
An old pawn shop?
Yeah. Well, again,
not mine, but
I would, How many other pawn shops are in Charlottesville?
There's 3 total, and 2 are mine.
Yeah. So,
and the other one, people say, wait, there's another one? And I was like, not as far as you're concerned.
Yeah.
If you don't know about it, then I'm not going to tell you about it. But
But I think the difference, again, I'm not trying to pat you on the back, though. I think it's good to pat you on the back, but it's different. You walk in your shop, it's clean, it's neat, it's bright, it's welcoming, it's friendly. Can't a church learn from that?
I think and I think that's a balance. Obviously, it's the same thing with business. There's a balance with how aggressively you. I'm trying to think of the way to put it, but you greet someone or present yourself to someone, and that's why I say a smile is free. And a smile, I don't think a smile, unless it's an awkward, weird smile, ever is, there's some people that maybe just have the wrong smile, but I think a smile, you can never go wrong with smiling at someone and saying, hey, how's your day going? Yeah. That's one of the things too, this is total aside, but if you want, there was an old book called, how to make friends and influence people.
How to win friends and influence people.
Yeah. one of the things I would say is one of the key things that I try to do is when I'm at the grocery store, or no, we check our own groceries out now, but anytime I'm dealing with a bank teller, hey, how's your day going? How's your day going? It's there's silence anyway. You're standing there in silence. You could either stand there in awkward silence and let the bank teller count out money or do whatever, have a transaction with someone, or you could fill the silence with something that actually might make their day better. Yeah. Oh, this person's actually a little concerned. Yeah. And so back to the customers and churches and people coming, be friendly and inviting, but the last thing someone wants to hear from me if they're walking in my door, hey, you should buy this. Hey, you should buy this. Sure. Hey, can I get your contact info so I can reach out to you later? I'm just walking in your door. I just want to maybe buy something. Yeah, but I just want to be able to reach out to you. Right? And so I don't think it's that. Sorry. But what I'm saying is when someone is coming for the first time, especially the first time, they just are there out of curiosity, and they're already a little bit. So what we do is when they walk in the door, we greet them. Hey, how's your day going? Fine. Is there anything we can help you with? No, I'm just looking around. Fine. That's you just take your time. You let us know if we can help you with anything. Yeah. And I think and we try to be balanced with that. And not always. Sometimes we neglect people. And one thing I always say, don't let us ignore you. It's just a way of saying, hey, I'm here if you need to ask me something or but I'm not going to be pushy. Yeah. Right. So there's a balance.
I definitely think there's a balance. Yeah. And again, churches, we get excited when new people come.
Yeah, I agree. I get excited when new customers come.
Yeah, we want you to be a part, and so
I don't think it's bad to be excited, by the way. No.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying about, hey, we want your information, we want this, that, and the other. That's a good point. I
didn't mean to bring it up. I'm going to be in such trouble with someone.
But back to your point about the bank teller and saying, hey, how's your day going? That is a great opportunity to carry it one step further, because I see more and more people are willing to be more open with you about the reality of how their day's going. Mm-hmm. It used to be whenever you asked, everybody say, oh, I'm fine, thank you. I'm fine, thank you. That's not necessarily consistent anymore. People will say, I'm having an awful day. Yeah. I mean, that it can be a kind of fairly regular, or, it's not going so well, or I feel really stressed today. And you can, by asking that simple question, hey, how's your day going today? And someone responding, oh, I'm having a bad day today, or something's going on, or whatever. I'm sorry about that. I'll be praying for you. I mean, I want to be careful to not make it awkward for the person. Let me lay hands on you, anoint you with oil right now.
I do that in my pawn shop all the time.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. That'd be a little awkward.
You could say, again, thinking of launching a church, starting a new church, being out in the marketplace. Hey, how's your day going? I'm not doing so good today. Hey, I'm a pastor, or I go to this church. I'll be praying for you. Here's my church. It's a great group of people. Would love to see you sometime if you need some encouragement. Something.
Yep.
Not push, but we're here if you need us.
And so I would say the same thing to someone who's looking to plant a church as someone who's looking to start a business. It's a little tricky because I started the business because I knew I was unemployed, right? I knew that I was no longer had a check coming and I needed to do something different. But one of the best things that I've been able to then relay to my employees as well is that it's not about you. Okay. Yeah. While you're here, that's one of the things I had to learn really quickly when I opened my doors. It's about that person that just walked through the door. Right? Because if it's about me when that person walked through the door, they're not staying, and I'm not gonna earn their business, because I have to earn their business, right? So it's not about me; it's about that person that just walked through the door, and I'd better do something that shows them, hey, I'm glad you're here. And that's one of the things too, I think, with the in the church world, that it's that we really need to make sure we never get inside of ourselves, because it's so easy to think it's about me, right?
Yeah.
It's about that person over there and that person over there. And it's the same with business. Businesses that thrive, you'll see it. Businesses that thrive are businesses that make a customer feel like, oh, they really are concerned about serving me and making sure. Now, that said, when you become part of my business, then it's time for you to serve.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's the same thing with churches, Hey, we're here to serve you. And by the way, you're part of our church now. You find a place to serve, because that's also something that is expected of you,
You think of just that aspect of customer service, thinking about others and how often we go in a place where the customer service is not there, and you're thinking, my goodness, I remember a few months ago being in a business, and something transpired that was not our fault, but it was caused by an employee who didn't do their job properly, and it created a big mess. And
a literal mess.
A literal mess. Yeah. And I had my kids with me, and other employees just stood and looked and said, "Oh, you can clean that up over there."
Good grief!
And I just thought the lack of perception of, we didn't create the mess; it happened on us. We're standing here in it, and now you're telling us to clean it up. And that is the opposite of what you're talking about with regards to, thinking about that, the adage, I won't say the customer is always right, but you should always be customer focused. And I think in the church, while I wouldn't phrase it, we should be focused on the person. Our primary focus is not on the individuals that are attending. It is on, I believe, on the glorification of Jesus Christ, of magnifying the Lord. But the goal is to get people saved, help people be whole in their relationship with God so that they can glorify Him. And you can't pull those people in without, in some way, helping them to feel welcome and part of the community.
That's funny. You said customer service. That expression used to be more literal, and I think, and that's one of the things too. And I do it out of spite sometimes, so shame on me. But when I walk into a store and they have a person standing there, the stores I'm talking about, standing there that's literally just supposed to greet people, and they don't, I specifically say, "Hey, how are you?" And like to wake them up, like, "Hey, you were supposed to have greeted me." But I think what you were saying, it's maybe they should have customer observation instead of customer service. They're no longer serving; they're just observing, instead of serving. That's
a good point to the church, though.
Right.
We can't just observe people coming in.
Yeah. No, we do. We should serve. And there's a difference in, people know when you're serving them.
Yeah.
People get it. They understand. No. Yeah. No, I appreciate this conversation. It was good. And I think, by the way, Riverstone Church in Charlottesville, Tobey's Pawn in Charlottesville, and help us put our money where our mouth is, and come visit and see if we if you're not already part of our church or a customer of mine, see if we kind of live up to what we're practice what we're preaching. Yeah. There you go. Good.
Well, work in progress.
Well,
we're trying.
Man. Yeah. I know people are like, "Well, how long have you been in business?" I've been in business, and that's the thing too, is then delegating and bringing other people along and helping them understand what's important too, and that's both in the business world and the church world too. So maybe we'll round up our wives for a conversation about children soon. But yeah, thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. There it is. Okay. I'll get this one day. We'll see. Thanks, Robert.
Good. Thank you.